Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to Geeks Watch. Today, I'm going to talk about the 2013 film Warm Bodies, an image of which you will see here. So, Warm Bodies is the classic story of, zombie boy meets living girl and decides not to eat the girl. I will say, for the most part, the film doesn't really do anything new. It's a boy meets girl romance movie set in a post-apocalyptic future after the zombies have taken over. What makes this film somewhat different is that it's told from the point of view of one of the zombies. Now, the zombie who calls himself because he can't remember his name and he thinks it starts with an R, and R is pretty much all he can say. So, as we're introduced to R, all we really get is just a deadpan monologue of his thoughts. He's like shuffling along with all the other zombies, and all you can hear is like his inner monologue of what's going, So I really, really enjoyed that. There's a lot of cool stuff that, in my opinion, is what goes through his head. To me, that's what made the film. There's also, I think it's kind of sweet. Obviously, R meets Julie. That's her name. Oops. Anyway, R meets Julie, and for whatever reason, he decides not to eat her. And she is terrified of him, but it's the zombie apocalypse. She kind of has to rely on him for survival for a short period of time. Without giving away too much, she's out looking for supplies with a group of other people. The zombies find them. The zombies attack them. R decides not to attack and eat her. So that's pretty much all there is to it. That's the opening bit of the film, and then what progresses there is their relationship, and I think it progresses well. Going from him being a non-communicative zombie to him learning to interact with her, and her just kind of like trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and slowly their relationship develops. So it's a classic romance story. There are elements of other romance stories which you would recognize, which I recognized pretty easily. There's a couple that I didn't quite get. There are a lot of allusions to a famous romance story in this. Like I said, some of which I noticed and some of which I did not. But it is, I admit, I'm a sucker for a good love story, or at least a semi-decent one. Not to the point where I watch the Romance Channel with my wife, but I can appreciate a good romance story. And like I said, this is sweet. I find, for the most part, how their relationship progresses is fairly believable. She doesn't like instantly trust him, this flesh-eating zombie. So, I think it progresses really well. I think, in my opinion, as we moved into the third act, it became much more predictable. I mean, it's a zombie romance. It's a zombie romance story. It's going to be predictable at some point. There's very little new under the sun. But I think I was at least engaged enough to not think about it, to not notice what was going on. I was interested. I was engaged. I was able to shut my brain off enough to really enjoy the story, up until a part around Act 3 where the pacing kind of slowed down a bit as we were waiting for the build up to the finale. And that was like, okay, We gotta punch the numbers. We gotta connect the dots and from point A to B to C to get to the end of the story. It's like there was a bit of a lull somewhere in Act 3 where I was kind of bored for like 10 or 15 minutes. Where I was like, I know where this is gonna go. Let's just get there, kind of thing. I enjoyed this enough that I actually watched some of the Blu-ray extras. I learned that this was based off of a novel of the same name, which was in turn based off a short story. The author of the book had written a short story called "I'm a Zombie and I'm Filled with Love," which, so it was well enough received that he wrote a full book out of it. He had no intention of it being a film, but someone managed to get a hold of the story and like, I love this, I need to make a movie out of this. I found the guy and said, let me make a movie of this film. So it was a decent project. There wasn't a lot of special effects. There wasn't a lot of need for special effects. There were some. For the most part, R's character, aside from being pale and having a few scars, he's a fairly whole zombie. There are quite a lot of zombies in the film which are mostly intact. There are some that are not, but this isn't like The Walking Dead where there's these half-rotting corpses, just completely wandering about with like missing limbs and stuff like that. It's a fairly clean zombie movie. There's not very much gore. You could almost say this is a family-friendly film. There's not a lot of profanity. There's very little. There's some violence, but aside from that violence, there's not really that much gore involved. The ending was okay, but it's still a fun movie. I still recommend it, just for the things that it does uniquely. It does well. By the time this goes out, Halloween will probably be over, so a bit late for spooky season. But I like Jonathan Holt. I like both the actors, both the male and female leads. I can't remember her name. Is it Teresa Palmer? Yeah, Nicholas Holt and Teresa Palmer. I am always Nicholas Holt is in a lot of sci-fi and horror movies. He was in this. He was in Renfield. He was in the remake of Nosferatu. He played Beast in X-Men First Class and some of the other X-Men movies. He's been in a lot of sci-fi and horror stuff, so good for him. What kills me, though, what I want to say is like both of the leads, Nicholas Holt and Teresa Palmer, are not from America. They both have either British or Australian accents. I think he's British and she's Australian, but I'm not. Don't quote me on that. But their accents are in that range. So it always kills me how these people pull off such flawless American accents, and how badly American actors pull off English and Australian accents. They're just so bad at it. How can we be so bad at that? We've watched so much Monty Python. How can we be so bad at doing British accents? But that's another story. So Warm Bodies is fun, but not great. Best parts of it are Acts 1 and 2. Act 3 kind of is a bit of a letdown, but it is what it is. As always, thanks for watching. As always, my stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.